West Bank because they believe it's easier for them to do that. You have every few days an attack, some successful, some not, some unfortunately lethal, others not. But at the end of the day, we don't see a shift in the Palestinian terror groups' incentive in how much they want to carry out attacks. And that's why we see a continuous Israeli operation across the West Bank, but mainly in the major terror hubs. That's Jenin, Nablus, and Tulkarm, really to try and what's called the lawnmower method, to continuously disrupt capability building and operations in the West Bank to try and limit the level of escalation that these terror groups can bring the situation to.
However, there's no question that there will be attempts and the motivation will be higher with individuals and with organizational forces to try to challenge us in the West Bank. We have to be very careful, and I'm sure the IDF takes this into account.
All right. Well, we're going to, turn to Lebanon right now because we've been so focused on obviously what took place this morning in Tehran with the assassination of Haniyeh that we've kind of taken the focus off of last night's attack, which made major news and kind of really set off what is probably going to be a much larger regional conflict, according to many different parties. It has been less than 24 hours since the assassination of Hezbollah's most senior military commander, that's Fouad Shukr. The IDF has claimed responsibility for the airstrike in Lebanon targeting him last night, which blew a major hole into the side of an 8-story apartment building in southern Beirut. Now, Lebanon's health ministry claims that 3 people were killed in the blast and that 74 people were wounded. Initially, Hezbollah did not confirm Shukr's death, but they later stated that he was in the building during the attack, suggesting that he is no longer alive. Now, this Hezbollah commander, was the head of Hezbollah's precision missile project. He has been wanted by the U.S. for his role in the 1983 bombing of a U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241 service personnel. And the IDF says that he was behind the deadly rocket attack on northern Israel on Saturday in the Druze town of Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights. And that strike saw 12 children and teens killed. At this point, there are currently 16 other kids who are still being hospitalized, 7 of whom remain in critical condition. Israel says it will not tolerate such attacks on its soil.
The IDF will not tolerate terrorist attack on Israeli civilians. We have been responding to these attacks with precise strikes on Hezbollah commanders, terror operatives, and military infrastructures in Lebanon. Hezbollah's ongoing aggression and brutal attacks are dragging the people of Lebanon and the entire Middle East into a wider escalation, while we prefer to resolve hostilities without a wider war. The IDF is fully prepared for any scenario. We have a duty to ensure the safe and secure return of Israelis to their homes in northern Israel. And we will continue to act to defend all people of Israel.
Well, joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent, Robert Swift. Robert, what is the latest on the ground? I mean, yesterday we saw heavy rocket fire from Hezbollah. Has the situation changed?
No, there's been no dramatic difference on the northern border itself. There has been one instance of cross-border fire, but that in itself is pretty much par for the course for the last 10 months. That being said, there have been a couple of indicators which things are a little unusual. While I've spoken to people here on the ground in Haifa who seem fairly relaxed about what's going on, I've noticed that our GPS locations are showing us as in Cyprus, which is the first time that's happened. Often GPS in the north of Israel shows you as being in Beirut, occasionally in Egypt, but Cyprus is a first, and it's not clear why that would be the case. aside from that, things do appear to be business as usual on the surface, but no doubt Israeli authorities under the bonnet are preparing for different eventualities and a response that may come. That being said, there's 3 days of mourning are being observed in various of the countries that make up the so-called axis of resistance. They're observing a 3 days of mourning following the death of Haniyeh. If a response is to come, there are some assessments that it may be after that period of time.
Now, what instructions are there for those who are living specifically in northern Israel?
So most Israelis have an application on their phone which will give them updates on the security precautions that they should take. Those living in the north of the country are under a much shorter time frame to respond to any rocket sirens. Here in the north, it's a matter of seconds. Where, say, if you were in Tel Aviv, when that location has had rockets at it, often it's more like 2 minutes. So people are advised to be close to their shelters. There's also been an instruction in the north to avoid large-scale public events. We're 10 months into the war, and a certain level of routine has gone back to much of the north. If you're looking at the areas outside of the evacuation zone, much of the north has been operating as usual for some time now. And so a reminder from Israeli authorities that the situation is fluid, and large-scale gatherings may not be the best idea at the minute.
All right, Rob, we're going to be back with you later on during the day. Thank you for joining us from the north of Israel with that update. I'd like to turn back to our studio guests. We have Doron Avital with us, Ariel Oseran, and of course, we now have Mark Schulman joining us. I will introduce you properly shortly. I just first want to ask a question about the assassination last night. Now, the IDF has essentially come out and confirmed that Shukar has been killed in the airstrike. What kind of messaging are we hearing right now from Hezbollah at this point?
It took them until this morning to acknowledge that Shukar was targeted in the strike, and without confirming his current situation, all they said in that regard of the strike yesterday was that Shukar was present inside the building at the time of the attack. That's all that they're saying right now. We are hearing unofficial voices, or official voices, but unofficially commenting on behalf of Hezbollah. For instance, one of Hezbollah's parliament members saying that Hezbollah is ready for war. And we are also hearing inside Lebanon, I would say surprising, others would say disturbing rhetoric on the part of the Druze community that you would imagine following a strike that killed 12 members of the Jewish community in Israel. This is a regional religion that is spread in multiple countries, Israel, Syria, Lebanon. And so you would expect some voicing of sympathy with regards to what happened, or even that it would perhaps create wedges between the different sects in Lebanon. But on the contrary, we're seeing the entire Jewish community in Lebanon really stand behind Hezbollah and support them, and basically adopt their messaging that what happened in Majal Shams is an Israeli ploy to try and sow division and discord among the different sects inside Lebanon. And it is surprising and or unfortunate that this is the position that the Druze community in Syria is taking. And so Hezbollah is still very cautious and keeping a strict veil of secrecy over the outcome of last night's elimination, but a first indication from a parliament member of Hezbollah saying we're ready for war.
Right. And yeah, Doron, I'm interested to kind of hear your take on this. Obviously, very mixed messaging coming from the Lebanese government as well. On one hand, they're saying we don't want this war, but they, also are suggesting, as we discussed last night, Ariel, that they really have no control over Hezbollah at this point.
Yeah, just on that point, the foreign minister of Lebanon saying we hope Hezbollah's response will be proportionate. That's basically him admitting that they have no say over what Hezbollah does or not or doesn't do, and that they relinquished their authority over Lebanon by not employing the standing army of the official government to carry out a response, but rather relegating responsibility to Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Well, the standing army of Lebanon is very weak, as the whole state of Lebanon is. It's a fragile society and state. This is a great blow to Hezbollah, we have to admit. Also, the manner of execution, the clean manner of execution with no collateral damage, with penetration of intelligence. Think what they will have to investigate how come, when they know that we are going to attack, that they are not prepared, and such a senior leader in such a position, a man that we track for years, a man that the U.S. is tracking for years since the time that we were officers in Beirut in '82 with the terrible killing of 42 Marine soldiers. And this guy, we succeed to penetrate and do it in such a clean way. This is a great blow. They have to rethink the whole infrastructure, but they, of course, would have to react in such fashion. We have to be prepared to some escalation, at least in the short term, and we hope not for a major regional conflict, but who knows?
Right, and you mentioned the United States right now, which is really gives us a good time to kind of transition to the rhetoric that we're hearing from American leaders right now. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic candidate in the upcoming presidential elections in the U.S., is now voicing support for Israel. She says that she unequivocally supports Israel's right to defend itself just hours after Israel's airstrike targeting the Hezbollah commander behind the deadly attack in the northern Israeli Druze town of Majd al-Shams on Saturday saw 12 children and teens killed.
I want to address what's happened over the last few hours in terms of the Middle East and be very clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, and I unequivocally support Israel's right to remain secure and to defend the security of Israel. What we know in particular is it has the right to defend itself against a terrorist organization, which is exactly what Hezbollah is. But all of that being said, we still must work on a diplomatic solution to end these attacks, and we will continue to do that work.
I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio and introduce Mark Schulman, who is now joining us, editor-in-chief of History Central, columnist as well at Newsweek. All right, so what was the U.S.'s involvement in the airstrike in Beirut? We've kind of been receiving conflicting reports, and Blinken just came out with statements right now regarding the attack.
I don't think the U.S. had a direct role. They may have had some secondary intelligence role we do not know. I mean, let's keep in mind, there was a $5 million bounty on this person's head. So clearly the U.S. can't object to the killing of him because he was responsible for the killing of all those Marines. I'm sure the French were also pretty happy. He's also responsible for 40 French soldiers who were killed at the same time. So I don't think America had a direct role. I think they see this, they were a little bit, I think they were a little concerned that it was Beirut. On the other hand, it was proportional in the sense that we didn't take out, when the first reports came in, it was a bombing near the airport. And said, oh, we did the airport? That's really going to create a whole set of problems. But no, it was very specific. It was a person we took out, a person who is definitely on everyone's radar as deserving to die effectively. So I don't think there were, there's no question there. In terms of Haniyeh in Tehran, I'm looking at caught everybody surprised, including, of course, all of us. I mean, we all woke up this morning into total shock, so that was a complete surprise. I'm fairly sure it was a surprise to the Americans. How we did it, we'll find out someday when the history books are written. I don't think we'll find out about it soon unless certain ministers can't keep their mouths shut. So we'll leave that part aside for the moment. I think America has a mixed feeling. I mean, Haniyeh is not a good guy. I mean, let's keep that in mind in every way we can think about it. I'm working on a book that goes from Oslo to today's war and going over all the times Hamas had bombings that pretty much derailed the peace process. Mm-hmm. Every time Arafat was getting closer to a deal with somebody, he would have another bombing, and we would start being very upset that Arafat wasn't taking care of Hamas, which he never did, but that's a different part of the story. But Hamas is probably the single most successful terrorist organization in history, that they've made it sure there would be no peace between Israel and the Palestinians. That was their goal, and they've successfully done it all these years. So, and Haniyeh had a big part in all of that. Right now, I guess the major concern, of course, is on the negative side is the question of the hostage negotiations. I don't think we're going to see any negotiations anytime soon. It's not at all clear that Netanyahu ever wanted these negotiations to be completed. But right now, after the 3 assassinations in the last 2 weeks, I do not see that going forward in the immediate term. Long term, anyone who thinks like they understand Sinwar in their minds, give up your visions of being able to know what he's thinking, because we don't understand him, we don't know him. We theoretically know him, but we don't seem to know him anyway. So I wouldn't even hazard to guess what the effect, medium and long term. Short term, there's going to be no deal in the immediate future, that's for sure.
Now, I'd like to kind of talk about the potential response that we could see from Iran right now, who has already vowed a harsh response to a violation of its territory. When we saw Iran attack Israel in retaliation for the airstrike on the consulate in Damascus, there were about 300 missiles that were fired at Israel. We saw coordination with the United States and also other nations to kind of protect the state of Israel and stop those missiles from actually landing. Can we expect that same support from the United States right now?
I think so at this point. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't. Again, we didn't attack a strategic target in Iran. We attacked a particular person, a particular Palestinian, not an Iranian. Yes, the Iranians are embarrassed, but what we attacked previous to the last attack was also a similar sort of action that we took. So I think the Americans will certainly be with us. I'm sure quietly our Arab allies will be with us as well. I don't know that Iran's going to try the same thing again, because the result is most likely going to be the same. And in effect, it shows great weakness. In other words, when you attack somebody and you totally fail, it really shows weakness. My guess, and again, I don't want to go into nevuah or trying to figure out, but it's more likely going to try something else, some sort of terror attack, some sort of other type of attack. To directly attack with missiles didn't work. There's no reason. Our systems haven't changed. They're probably even a little bit better right now. So I don't imagine that'll change. The United States will certainly stand by us. Biden, at this point, has nothing to lose. He's not going to want to show that he's walked away from an ally before an election campaign where he wants his vice president elected. So I suspect we'll see the same sort of cooperation this time as we saw last time, if they go that route. Again, doing the same thing twice it fails is a certain insanity. Of course, we don't know what sort of sanity exists in the Iranian regime, except they're thoughtful. So I think we should worry about something else happening.
I think it's a valid point. I mean, first Lloyd Austin voiced his support to us.
And we're about to turn.
No question about that. But the venue of secretive warfare, terror acts against diplomats and outside, they might take this venue.
All right. On that note, you just mentioned Lloyd Austin. Now, the U.S. remains adamant that it's going to be pursuing a diplomatic solution to try and calm tensions between Hezbollah and Israel specifically. Here's U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's take on this.
I don't think war is inevitable. I maintain that. I think there's always room and opportunities for diplomacy, and I'd like to see parties pursue those opportunities. And certainly what we've seen along the border, the northern border with Israel, over time, that's been a concern of ours. Again, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we keep things from turning into a broader conflict throughout the region.
Diplomacy. I don't want to say that it seems laughable at this point, but obviously we have seen a serious escalation with two top assassinations within the last 24 hours alone. Mark, at this point, is diplomacy even an option that is on the table? Could there be a diplomatic resolution here?
Okay, there always is going to be a diplomatic resolution. The end day, whether it's next week or next year, or we get into a 5-year war, God forbid, whatever it is, the end you have a diplomatic solution. There's no such thing. I mean, we're not going to conquer all the Middle East, or no one's going to conquer us. So there is going to be a
the question, though, is when that
right, exactly,
is
when. Is the moment right now? Probably not. Can the moment be in 3 or 4 weeks? It's possible. I mean, maybe Netanyahu is going to decide after the bump that he'll no doubt get in the polls after this that maybe he can risk an election. So maybe he'll go for a hostage deal if Hamas is willing to in 4 or 5 months, 4 or 5 weeks. We don't know. Look, there is a diplomatic solution that's over there. It's been waiting for us to take it. We haven't taken it for various reasons. It will not solve the Middle East conflict. We will not get peace in our times. I don't expect peace in my lifetime. But we could get a period of quiet and get our hostages back potentially. So I wouldn't write it off. I wouldn't expect it anytime in the next few weeks.
Anyone calling for a diplomatic solution to this current situation between Israel and Hezbollah should also be able to provide an answer what has happened to the current political situation that is, or diplomatic solution that is in play for the past 18 years. There is a UN resolution that is the definition of a diplomatic solution, a UN resolution forbidding Hezbollah to have weapons and military personnel south of the Litani River. For 18 years, that's been completely ignored. So what value does a diplomatic solution have? I know Israel, at least its leadership, is saying that it is open and willing to find a diplomatic solution, but that diplomatic solution would have to have the same results as are in the current, or are stipulated in the current UN Resolution 1701. And anything short of that will be a continuous failure of the diplomatic avenue.
There's no question that what we're going to do, if there's a 1701, we are going to enforce 1701. I mean, the whole attitude of the army, the strategy would be more offensive. So, and what we didn't do since the Lebanon War of 2006 is we didn't enforce the agreement, and we were hoping that the UN or Lebanese army would force an agreement which it cannot force, basically. So we would see a different, a very dynamic IDF strategy, if indeed there is some kind of settlement.
The same goes with Gaza. Look, our biggest mistake, in my opinion, over these years is that we allowed agreements to dissipate. You know, when we pulled out of Gaza in disengagement, I was in favor of it, but I said, if one rocket falls after we've pulled out, they have no reason to be firing rockets, because let's not forget, there were rockets being fired at Sderot before we ever pulled out with the disengagement. I said, we can obliterate Gaza. Of course, that's not the way things worked out in the world for a lot of reasons. But the reality is the first time any of these agreements are violated, we have to take very strong action. And if the Hezbollah force begins to cross the Litani, if that's the agreement, then we eliminate that force the minute they cross the Litani. That has to be our attitude. That's, you know, there needs to be an agreement, but one that we enforce, and I agree 100%. But that's part of the problem over these years is we never enforce the agreements. We sort of let it to others or hope for the best. We can't hope for the best anymore.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we had this security zone in the past from 78, from 82 and further until the 2000. Now we'll have to have this security zone that is dynamically enforced all the time. This is the concept that the IDF generals right now have in mind. If we have the 1701, we have the Litani border, right now we all the time dynamically, by incursion, by supervision from air, we all the time force the security zone without actually being in the security zone. This is the new concept that the army is working on right now, if there is a resolution, of course.
Yeah, you know, obviously at this point, and you can kind of feel the tension amongst the Israeli public. There are so many different fronts of violence that Israel is dealing with. We're dealing with the northern border, ongoing fighting in Gaza, now Iran threatening the state of Israel following this assassination attempt. We can expect most likely attacks also from its other proxy groups out of Iraq and Yemen. In fact, last night, we understand that there was some violence that took place in Iraq specifically, correct?
There's an American airstrike on Popular Mobilization Front headquarters. That's the umbrella organization of the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, but specifically, excuse me, the Kataib Hezbollah, the Iraqi pro-Iranian militia, they were targeted. 7 of their members were eliminated. And yeah, indeed, the skies of the Middle East were very active and very violent yesterday.
Right. So, I mean, it points to, obviously, as we've been discussing, a larger escalation taking place. Again, the question is how prepared Israel actually is. I'd like to turn to our correspondent, who's going to be joining us shortly from Tel Aviv. But, you know, the question now is how should Israelis prepare for an escalation in the fighting in the coming days? The IDF says that there are still no changes at this point to guidelines for Israeli civilians following last night's airstrike in Beirut, targeting a top Hezbollah commander, and then, of course, this morning's assassination of Hamas's leader in Tehran. But the IDF says it is still conducting a situation assessment, and if any change is decided upon, the public will be updated immediately. Either way, Israelis are on edge.
People are basically waiting in all this last year for a much greater war to begin, and maybe this is the cue that it will be open. We also see less people on the streets, less people taking the cars and going to do the social day work. So I guess there are people more at home. We'll see how it goes.
To be honest, again, now I feel much more relaxed than in the beginning of the war, because you know, what can you do? You know, being tense, we're already tense to the top, so I don't think there are any more mental place to be more tense.
Joining us now is our correspondent Balir Sladin from Hostage Square here in Tel Aviv. Balir, in Lebanon, some international airlines have already decided to stop flights to Beirut until August 1st because of the fighting. Are we seeing the same thing happen to Israel following these assassinations?
Well, up until now, we know that the Ben Gurion airport is still working normally, and there is no any changes. And also, I haven't seen any airlines saying that they canceled their flights. There has been at the beginning of the week a couple of flights for Lufthansa that has been canceled, but Lufthansa said that this is because of operative reasons and not because of the security situation. So for now, everything is normal. Even here in Tel Aviv, I see people around me here at the Hostages Square, which is in front of the Kiryat, where the security assessment is taking place with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. But in Rishon LeZion, which is a city south of Tel Aviv, the municipality there has cancelled all of the events, although that it hasn't been asked by the Home Front Command. So apparently they are taking this measure only for their own reasons and not something that is required from them. Also, the Security Cabinet is going to meet here at the Kiryat at around 4 o'clock this afternoon, so in a couple of hours, including the ministers of the Cabinet. And apparently there has been some, like a demand from the Prime Minister's office for all of the ministers not to comment on Haniyeh's assassination. We know that Israel hasn't taken responsibility officially for that until now. Usually they don't take responsibility for that, and we're seeing that the international comments about this assassination is also mixed. Some are greeting it, like the Prime Minister of one of the leaders of the coalition in Holland, but in some other places like Turkey and Qatar, they're condemning it. And the families of the hostages here, although they hasn't commented on it, but the Tikva Forum, which is one part of the families of the hostages, they are saying that this is important for the continuation of the pressure on Hamas in order to release the hostages. But the Forum of the Families, which is containing most of the families of the hostages, hasn't commented on that yet.
Right. That's kind of what I wanted to hear more about was, the response from hostage families as a whole. Like you said, there hasn't been much of a comment. But, we're hearing a lot of analysts say right now, especially following Qatar's statements, that, they think that this is going to severely impact the deal on the table, that this was a mistake on Israel's part in terms of getting those hostages back. At this point, what is the latest news that we have about the status of the hostages who have been taken captive by Hamas in Gaza?
Well, this assassination is happening while the talks are continuing. I mean, yesterday there has been a meeting in Rome. A couple of days ago there has been a meeting in Rome, and nothing has changed since then. Hamas is declining to comment, or declining, to accept the terms, the new terms that Israel has proposed, including those of the Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor, as well as the possibility of the transfer of the militias or the militants that has arms, or the combatants, let's call them, to the north of the Gaza Strip. So the talks are in sort of a deadlock. The pessimism is still the what Israel is seeing right now. But of course, anything can change. Maybe because of this assassination, pressure will be more on Hamas, but also maybe in the other way around, because of Haniyeh's role in the talks. We're going to see a few days or maybe a few weeks of just stuck in this talks over again.
All right, Balir Tladin joining us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Thank you for that update. We'll be back with you later on today. I'd like to just turn back to our guests for some final comments. We barely kind of spoke about public reactions, but obviously, let's be honest. A lot of Israelis woke up this morning on edge, concerned about what they need to do to protect themselves. As three analysts, who have been following the news for quite some time, how are you all preparing?
I mean, there's two parts to this. First of all, most Israelis woke up reasonably happy. That's number one. We need to understand that the fact that we were able to do these two things successfully after a lot of false starts in this war, people were at least happy about that. The second thing, we're all concerned, right? We're all, I was going to go out to lunch with my wife today, and we're pretty far from the house, and we have a dog. I decided not to go. It's too far away because what could happen in the meantime. So we make those decisions on a regular basis. Something's going to happen. We know it. We'll have to just live through it.
All right. Quick, 10-second answer here before we go for a break.
Israel has shown its hand. It's important. It gives confidence to the public, but we have to expect escalation, and we have to be prepared. It's not going to be easy.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. That is it for now from the I-24 News Desk. We'll be back shortly with continued updates. I'm Natasha Kirtchuk, and we'll see you next time.